This was back in high school, early 2000s, when most of us still spent Friday nights hanging out at someone's house instead of going anywhere else. That particular night, my group of friends had planned to watch a movie at Jeremy's place. I was riding with my closest friend, and we ended up getting there a few minutes earlier than the others. Rather than walking inside and dealing with small talk with Jeremy's parents, we figured we'd just wait in the cul-de-sac in his car. We had the radio on and were joking around, just killing time. Not long after, Jeremy and another one of our friends showed up. Instead of all of us heading into the house, they climbed into the back seat with us. It turned into this impromptu hangout session in the car, which at first felt a little strange, but soon we were laughing, talking, and enjoying ourselves without having to worry about keeping quiet or being overheard. We probably sat there for at least an hour and a half, maybe more, just joking about school, sports, and whatever else came up. Sometime after midnight, while we were still sitting there, a white van pulled into the driveway of the house next door to Jeremy's. It wasn't fast or dramatic. It just rolled in slowly and then stopped. The engine stayed on, but no one got out for several minutes. All four of us had our eyes locked on it, our conversation trailing off as we tried to figure out what the driver was doing. Eventually, the man inside stepped out. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s, dressed in dark clothes, with a clean-shaven face and dark hair. There was nothing about his appearance that would have been memorable if we'd seen him anywhere else, but the fact that he was standing in a neighbor's driveway that late at night made the whole situation uncomfortable. Jeremy assured us he didn't recognize the guy, and that no one like that lived in the house. At first, the man just lingered near his van, but then he shifted his attention toward the house. He slowly made his way up the driveway, calm as can be, and then onto the porch. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He simply stood in front of the door, peering through the glass panel at the top, as if he was trying to see inside. Every so often, he leaned forward slightly like he was straining to catch a glimpse of something. We couldn't see anything in his hands, so he wasn't holding a package, tools, or anything obvious. He just stood there. The atmosphere inside our car changed immediately. What had been funny and lighthearted turned into complete silence. None of us knew if we should get out, yell something, or stay hidden. The man didn't move for what felt like 20 minutes. Whether it was that long or not, it was far too much time for someone to be silently staring into a stranger's house after midnight. We debated calling the police, or at least alerting Jeremy's parents, but we froze instead. None of us wanted to make a noise or draw attention to ourselves. Eventually, the man turned around, walked back down the steps, and climbed into the van like nothing had happened. He started the engine right up and began backing out of the driveway. For some reason, instead of letting him drive off, we decided to follow him. My friend, who was driving, kept his headlights off as we trailed behind at a distance. The neighborhood was quiet at that hour, and there was no disguising that we were the only other car on the road. The van crawled along at first, but when it became obvious we were tailing him, he started to accelerate. My friend matched his speed until we reached the main road out of the neighborhood. At that point, the van sped up and disappeared down the street. We sat at the exit for a minute, just to make sure he didn't turn around and come back. When we finally returned to Jeremy's, all of us were buzzing from the adrenaline. We got out of the car and headed inside, laughing nervously at how long we thought we'd been hidden, only to realize we had been sitting directly under a streetlight the entire time. Anyone could have seen us without effort. That thought kept us on edge, and even after we were inside, none of us slept much. Every so often, someone would sneak a glance out the window to make sure the van hadn't returned. It never did, at least not while we were awake. Looking back now, I regret that we didn't call the cops. We even had the guy's license plate number written down, yet we didn't do anything with it. At the time, we were just frozen between being scared and feeling like we were part of some weird adventure. Nothing bad ended up happening, but that man's behavior was too strange to brush off. What sticks with me the most is how unusual the whole setup was. We almost never sat in a car outside Jeremy's house, and in fact, I don't think we ever did it again. It just happened that one random night we chose to wait outside, and because of that, We witnessed something we can't explain. When I was 17 back in 2009, I worked as a courtesy clerk at a local grocery store. My main job was bagging groceries and hauling carts in from the parking lot, but sometimes I helped out with other little things too. My mom and sister both worked there at the time, so the store had this family vibe for me, and I usually felt safe being there. A lot of the older guys I worked with looked out for me, since I got unwanted attention from grown men more often than I should have at that age. Sometimes my boss would even drive behind me after closing just to make sure no one followed me home. There's one situation from that time that I'll never forget. It was the middle of summer, ridiculously hot, and I had just pushed in what felt like 100 carts. I ducked into the little pizzeria corner inside the store to cool down and grab some water. While I was standing there, sweaty and drained, this guy in his 20s or 30s walked right up to me and handed me a slip of paper with his phone number. He didn't even say much, just slipped it into my hand and walked away like it was no big deal. I barely processed it because I was so tired, but something about how casually he did it stuck with me. The very next day I was walking across the lot when a silver minivan rolled up beside me. I noticed a tiny pair of baby shoes swinging from the mirror. It was the same guy. He leaned out and tried to start a conversation, but I cut him off and told him straight out that I was 17 and already had a boyfriend. Usually when I said that, guys backed off, but this one just stared at me for a moment before driving away. That night, when the store was close to shutting down, one of the cashiers leaned over and whispered that someone was watching us. I turned my head and saw him again, the man from the van, standing by the end of the register lane, staring without saying a word. My stomach dropped. I told the night manager right away, and he left the office door open while counting tills so he could keep an eye out. The man walked out eventually, but instead of leaving, he stood outside near the entrance waiting. My manager ended up driving behind me again that night to make sure I got home safe. Things didn't end there, though. A couple of days later, I got a random text from my aunt. She and I barely ever talked, so it was strange. She had sent me a link to a Craigslist missed connections post, asking if I thought it was about me. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The post said something along the lines of, "Saw you at the grocery store. You had a bow in your hair, suspenders hanging off your shorts, a stack of wristbands, and bright-colored hair. Your name tag said Garrett. I'm 40, would like to meet up." What unsettled me the most was the level of detail. He described everything I was wearing that day down to the smallest accessory. But the Garrett part really freaked me out, because Garrett wasn't my name. The guys I worked with and I used to switch name tags as a joke sometimes, just to mess with customers. That meant this man had been watching me closely enough to notice and then remember the fake name I just happened to be wearing. I went straight to my day manager and showed him the post. He immediately replied to it, pretending to be a parent, writing something like, "Too young for you, parent." He didn't even hesitate. After that, things just kept getting creepier. I'd spot silver minivans around the lot or on my way home, and sometimes I wasn't sure if it was even him. But then one night, I saw him parked outside and rushed back into the store to avoid him. Not long after, I turned down an aisle, and there he was, already behind me. There was no way he could have parked and gotten inside that fast. When I screamed, he bolted and disappeared before anyone else could see him. That was the point where the police had to get involved. For about a week, they sent officers to escort me home after every shift, just to make sure nothing happened. Eventually, I was transferred to another location in a different town, and after that, I never saw the man or his van again. I still think about that Craigslist post sometimes. The fact that he noticed every detail about me, memorized them, and then wrote it out publicly makes my skin crawl even now. Being hit on by older men unfortunately never stopped, but that experience with the van and the post has stuck with me in a way the others didn't. I'm 26, and this happened just last week while I was in Cologne, visiting a friend I also work with. We'd spent most of the day together, and by the time evening rolled around, I was making my way back on my own. Around 8, I walked over to the bus stop near the center of the city. It was one of those small shelters with a bench and a glass wall, nothing special. The place was nearly empty except for a woman sitting on the opposite side. At first, I didn't really pay her much attention. I was scrolling through messages on my phone, catching up with a few friends back home, not really focused on anything else. But after a while, I set my phone aside and looked around. That's when I really noticed her. She seemed to be in her 30s, thin, dressed in this all-black outfit. Dress, long boots, even a wide hat that was resting next to her seat. The thing that struck me most wasn't the clothes, but her face. Her skin looked so pale it almost seemed sickly under the streetlights, and dark rings had been drawn around her eyes like heavy makeup. None of that is too strange in itself, but the way she stared at me was unnerving. Her eyes didn't move away. She didn't glance off into space like people usually do when they make brief eye contact with a stranger. Instead, her stare locked onto me and just stayed there. Her lips pulled back in this smile that didn't look natural, and every so often she'd drag her tongue across them like she was keeping them wet. At the same time, she hummed some quiet tune I couldn't recognize, just repeating it under her breath while her gaze didn't shift. I tried ignoring her, but the longer it went on, the harder it became. This continued for what must have been 10 minutes. Every time I glanced her way, her eyes were fixed on me. I tried softening the mood, gave a little wave, even said hello at one point, but she didn't answer, just kept watching. It was like being singled out. The longer it dragged on, the more on edge I became. Eventually, her behavior escalated. She started breathing heavier, grinding her teeth together, making these squeaking noises as if she couldn't contain herself anymore. That was the moment I spoke up. I stood and told her firmly to stop, raising my voice just enough that it carried across the stop but without moving toward her. She froze, then muttered something that sounded like an apology. For a second, I thought maybe it was over. But then, as I checked my phone to text my friends about being late, she let out this piercing cry that cut through the quiet street. Before I could react, she jumped up and began moving toward me, mumbling rapidly in German that I couldn't fully understand. I started backing away slowly, trying to put distance between us, but her pace quickened until she was rushing straight at me. Her nails dug into my arms when she grabbed me, sharp enough to break the skin, and she tried snapping at me like she was about to bite. My shirt ripped at the shoulder while I shoved her back, adrenaline taking over. I didn't want to hit her, but at that point it was about protecting myself. I swung at her just hard enough to get her to loosen her grip, and then shoved her off balance, which gave me the chance to sprint. I cut across the street and ran into a small shop where a couple people were inside. I blurted out what happened, showing the scratches on my arm, and they urged me to call the police. One of them even cleaned up the cuts with some antiseptic while I waited for help to arrive. When I went down to the station later that night, the officers suggested I file a report so they could pursue the case. I thought about it but ended up declining. I was heading back home in just a few days, and I didn't want to spend my time buried in paperwork and meetings. Still, the marks on my arm were enough to remind me the whole thing wasn't just in my head. I've turned the whole event over in my mind a dozen times since. I don't know if she was on something, suffering from mental illness, or if it was something else entirely. What I do know is that I've never had a stranger fixate on me with that kind of intensity before, and it was one of the most disturbing encounters I've ever dealt with. I'm a grown man and managed to get away, but if it had been a kid or someone less able to defend themselves, it might have ended very differently. Earlier this year, after my girlfriend's mom passed away, she and her sister inherited this cabin by a small lake. It's not just some rundown shack either. It's actually a really nice spot, tucked away with its own dock and a little stretch of woods around it. Her mom practically lived there most of the year, so when it fell to them, it felt important to keep it in the family. Since the summer, my girlfriend's brother and I have been driving up on weekends to fix the place. Nothing major, just steady work. Extra bedroom, new pier for the kids, repairs here and there. At first, it was kind of wholesome. Neighbors and a few family friends stopped by, mostly to offer condolences or to peek at the renovations. Everyone seemed polite, no drama. We even posted a private property sign at the trail entrance, and for a while it felt like people respected it. The only odd thing was once seeing a truck pull in, then back out without a word. Didn't think much of it since there are cameras out front, mostly set up so my sister-in-law could keep an eye on the place when no one was around. Then came the weekend I went up alone. The others had a wedding, and I figured I could handle the smaller jobs myself. Right when I opened the door, I was hit with this stale wave of cigarette smell. None of us smoke, and it wasn't faint either. It clung to everything. I couldn't figure out where it came from, though. Just lingered in the air. There were also a couple dirty plates in the sink, which might have been left by my brother-in-law. But the whole thing gnawed at me. Something felt wrong, like somebody else had been inside. After that weekend, I started checking the security footage more carefully. For weeks, nothing showed. No vehicles, no strangers walking by, just the occasional animal setting off the motion lights. It became almost frustrating, because the smell, the little things around the cabin, I knew they weren't my imagination. Then this morning, everything changed. We decided to leave earlier than usual, because we had a long day planned re-roofing the cabin. The timing must have caught someone off guard, because not 5 minutes after we unlocked the front, I heard a door slam from the other side of the house. It wasn't a wind gust. It sounded like someone bolted the second they heard us. I stepped out onto the porch and caught a glimpse of movement disappearing into the tree line. Whoever it was, they didn't stick around to explain themselves. When I checked, the sliding back door was unlocked. That shook me the most, because we follow a checklist every single time we leave, and locking every door is at the top of it. Whoever has been hanging around knew our schedule well enough to avoid the cameras and keep slipping in undetected. We got through the day's work, but I couldn't shake the thought that this person is probably still out there, circling, maybe even watching us. He knew exactly when we usually arrive, and was confident enough to make himself at home for weeks, without leaving a single trace on the cameras. That's what chills me. I haven't told my girlfriend about it yet, because if she knew, she'd never want to go back, and this place means too much to her. But I'm not sure what's worse, keeping her in the dark, or admitting there's probably a stranger who's been treating the cabin like their own. I wish I had something to prove this story, because every time I think back to it, it feels unreal. Luckily, I wasn't the only one who experienced it. 2 coworkers saw the same thing that night, and if they hadn't, nobody would have ever taken me seriously. In 2021, I was 17 and working at a Papa John's near my high school. My routine was the same every week. School let out in the afternoon. I drove over to work, and I stayed until close. The shop was in one of those little strip malls, so the entire front wall was just glass windows. Anyone walking by could look in and see us, which usually didn't matter much, but that night it absolutely did. It was a Wednesday shift, which meant things were slow. We had almost no orders coming in, so it was just me and 2 other employees handling everything while the manager took off for a while. I'll call them T, who was 15, and M, who was my age. We were basically killing time until closing. T and M hung out near the front counter while I prepped dough in the back. Not long into the shift, this tall guy walked past the windows wearing a full clown outfit. I'm talking about a cheap Spirit Halloween mask with frizzy blue hair and one of those loud, baggy costumes covered in polka dots. At first, it barely registered. It was early October, so it seemed like some guy either heading to a costume party or trying to make people laugh. But then he walked by again, this time slower, turning his head toward the windows to look in at T and M standing near the register. That's when all 3 of us started paying attention. For the next half hour, we kept seeing him, sometimes just pacing in front of the store, other times disappearing and then reappearing like he was circling around. T kept trying to text our manager, but we never got a response. What shook me the most was when the clown came right up to the window, pressed his face against the glass, and cupped his hands around his eyes like he was trying to peer inside. The mask made it impossible to read his expression, but the gesture alone made my stomach turn. We were just a bunch of teenagers in there, and this stranger was glued to the front of the store like we were a show. It went on for almost an hour. The breaking point was when Em said she needed to run out to her car to grab something. The parking lot was right in front of the entrance, but she hesitated. In the end, she decided to go anyway, with T standing watch at the door. I was in the back when it happened, but when I came up front again, T and M were pale and freaked out. M told me that as soon as she turned back toward the store, the clown was standing nearby, locked on her. Then he started humping the air while staring straight at her. She bolted back inside, T locked the door, and none of us knew what to do besides call the store owner on the office phone. The owner managed to get hold of our manager, who finally came back a little before closing. By then, the clown was long gone. I was nervous walking to my car that night, but thankfully nothing else happened. Still, the whole thing left me rattled. It wasn't Halloween night. It wasn't a prank that lasted a few minutes. It was someone who deliberately spent almost 2 hours creeping around a pizza shop full of teenagers. And to this day, I can't make sense of it. My grandma lives in a really tiny town, the kind where everyone knows each other, and there's just one main road with a gas station, a post office, and not much else. Whenever I visit her, I try to get outside and do some small hikes. She used to come with me when I was younger, but lately she prefers to stay in because of the heat. That day, the weather was hot and bright, so she suggested I go check out a trail behind the woods near her house. She'd shown me the entrance years ago, and I remembered it being quiet and almost hidden. Before heading out, I rolled a small joint and smoked a bit once I was already on the path. It's something I enjoy doing when I'm alone outside. It makes me slow down and take in everything around me, like the sounds of the birds and the way the light cuts through the branches. For the first hour and a half, it was peaceful. The trail was silent except for the buzzing of insects and the crunch of gravel under my shoes. Then I noticed a man walking in my direction from up ahead. At first, I didn't think too much about it because every once in a while you'll run into another person out there. But this trail isn't very popular, especially in hot weather, so it struck me as a little odd. The closer he came, the more unusual the encounter felt. He wasn't just walking by like someone enjoying a stroll. His gaze was fixed straight on me, and when I tried to look away and then back again, he was still staring. He was tall, with this rigid posture, and his walk had a strange stiffness to it. When we finally got close enough to pass, I gave a casual hello to cut the tension, but he didn't return the greeting in any normal way. Instead, he let out a faint kind of mumble, something too low for me to understand, and I caught a glimpse of this unsettling grin. His teeth were in terrible shape, and the expression didn't look friendly. It looked like he was enjoying something I didn't understand. I kept walking, but something made me glance back after a few steps. He wasn't walking anymore. He was just standing there, still angled toward me, his head turned like he was following me with his eyes. The second he noticed me looking, he twisted his body back forward as if to pretend he wasn't staring. That sent a cold shiver through me, even though the sun was beating down hard. Because I'd smoked earlier, part of me tried to brush it off as paranoia. Maybe I was just reading too much into it. I kept moving deeper into the trail, trying to focus on the music I'd put on through my headphones. About 20 minutes later, though, I realized I had made a mistake. The path ended abruptly in a dead end, and I had no choice but to turn around and head back the exact way I'd come. That meant going in the direction he had gone. The thought of crossing paths with him again made my stomach knot, but I forced myself to keep moving. After about 40 minutes of walking back, I finally started to relax a little. I told myself the odds of seeing him again were low, and all I had to do was keep walking until I got back to town. The sun was draining me, and I was just starting to zone out when I came around a bend and froze. There was a bench just off to the side of the trail, and sitting on it was the same man. It wasn't just that he was there, it was the way he was positioned. From that bench, he had a clear view of the path, and if I passed him, I'd have to walk right in front of him with my back exposed as I moved on. He hadn't seen me yet because of the angle, but I had no choice but to keep going. My chest tightened as I approached, and I tried to keep my pace steady like nothing was wrong. The second he noticed me, his head turned slightly, and that same grin spread across his face again. It was identical to before, stretched and toothy, like he found the entire situation amusing. My body felt wired, every muscle ready to bolt. I passed by him as calmly as I could manage, but I didn't take my eyes off him for a second. He kept staring at me as I moved past, and for a split second I thought he might leap up from the bench. When I was just a little farther ahead, instinct took over. I picked up speed, then started jogging, and soon I was sprinting down the trail as fast as I could. I didn't stop until the bench and the man were far behind me, out of sight. My lungs were burning, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and my heart felt like it was going to punch through my chest. By the time I made it back to my grandma's, I was still shaking. I kept replaying the entire thing in my head, trying to figure out what that man's intentions were. The idea that he might have sat on that bench knowing I'd be forced to double back still bothers me. I don't think it was random that he was there. Even now, I can't brush off the thought that maybe I was extremely lucky that day. Back when I was 18, I used to visit my girlfriend a lot. Her parents were the type who watched her like a hawk. So the only chance we had to actually spend time together was whenever I made the trip out to her place. It wasn't super far, but since I lived in the city, it usually took close to an hour by train if things were running smoothly, which wasn't always the case. Most weekends I'd make the trip without thinking twice. This one Saturday felt like every other. I'd spent the day at her place, and by the time I had to leave, I knew I needed to rush back because my parents also didn't like me staying out late. I hurried to the station, only to realize I'd left my Metro card back at her place. Instead of running back, I figured I'd just hop the turnstile and get on with it. It wasn't the smartest idea, but I was worried about being late. As soon as I did, I noticed a man standing on the other side of the gate. He looked like he was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, and his clothes made him stand out immediately. He had on this old tank top that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks, and his hair was sticking up in every direction like he'd just rolled out of bed. When I came down, he had been yelling about something I couldn't make out, but the moment he saw me, he stopped. I tried not to pay attention to him. I had my headphones on, music going, and I just wanted to find a spot on the platform until the next train showed up. Still, after walking a little farther down, I noticed movement behind me. When I glanced back, he was keeping pace with me, not too close but close enough that I could tell he had shifted direction to follow. I stopped by one of the big concrete pillars, pretending to check my phone, and sure enough, he slowed down too. He didn't stand still though. He kept walking back and forth, muttering to himself, and occasionally glancing my way. The platform was nearly empty, only a couple of people way at the other end, so it felt like there was a spotlight on the two of us. I was boxed in. If I kept going, I'd end up at the dead end of the platform, and if I stayed, I was just stuck with this guy hovering behind me. That's when I texted my brother and asked if I could FaceTime him. I explained what was going on, and once he picked up, I tilted the camera so he could see behind me. That way, I didn't have to turn around, but he could tell me exactly what the man was doing. Through my earbuds, I could hear my brother describing how the guy was pacing, looking straight at me every few seconds, and moving in a jittery, unpredictable way. He told me it seemed like the man's energy was building up the longer I stood there. I tried to keep my face neutral, but my hands were trembling a little. I don't usually scare easily in the city, but this was different. I figured moving might help, so I started walking farther down while keeping my brother on the line. The man followed again, keeping a steady distance, his voice rising in these sharp bursts as he kept talking to himself. By the time I settled behind another pillar, it felt like the situation wasn't improving at all. Every time I checked the train schedule, the delay seemed longer. 10 minutes went by, each one dragging slower than the last. Finally, I heard the rumbling of the train as it entered the station, though it was crawling at an unusually slow pace. While it approached, I saw the man stop pacing and stand completely still. My brother whispered that the way he was positioned, it looked like he was waiting for me to step closer to the tracks. That broke me into a cold sweat. I stayed firmly planted where I was, letting the train come all the way in before I moved again. As soon as it stopped, I quickly walked farther down so I could board a different car, keeping as much distance as possible between myself and him. The guy didn't try to follow this time. Instead, he just turned and walked back the other way. Later on, my brother told me he was convinced the man had been waiting for the right moment to shove me toward the edge. The slow arrival of the train must have ruined whatever he was planning. I didn't want to believe that was true, but the way the guy had been pacing and staring made me think it wasn't just paranoia.